Books, books. I like books. I'm gonna read them all. Hi readers, Chris here. Today I'm going to be talking about Insomnia by Stephen King. And yes, that's right. If you see in the little corner of this book, I got this book for 25 cents, this book, at a library sale. Now, a little bit of background on my experience with Insomnia. Insomnia is the first book that I ever read by Stephen King. Yes, that's right. I started out with Insomnia. I have no idea why, because I read this book when I was a teenager, like in high school, I think. I have not reread it since that time until recently. So, needless to say, that was a long time ago. I really didn't remember much about this book, and I'm going to talk about this more in the plot, but all I remembered about this book is it was about a guy who couldn't sleep and he saw little bald guys. So that is my experience with Insomnia. So I'm going to talk about the three things I normally talk about: world building, characters, and plot. So let's jump in with world building. Insomnia takes place in a very well-known town in the Stephen King universe, and that is Derry, Maine. If you are familiar with a lot of Stephen King's books, you've read a lot of them, the name Derry might sound familiar to you. It's been featured in It, most famously, the home of Pennywise the Clown, but it's been featured or referenced or named in a bunch of other King books. I'm not sure if there are others that specifically take place in Derry. I know there's one I'm probably forgetting. Let me know in the comments below. But this book takes place in Derry. And because it takes place in Derry, where other books have taken place, it does actually reference like events from other books. This is like one of the things that makes reading Stephen King a really fun experience. It's because of all these little Easter eggs. So, for example, in It, there's a lot of murders that go on. But there's one in particular that is referenced in this book where a townsperson was killed, and that event is referenced in here. There's a number of other things that are referenced as well. But again, like I said, seeing these Easter eggs, recognizing them, being able to point them out is one of the things that makes reading Stephen King's books so much fun. It's kind of like you feel like you're part of this club or like this party and you got an invitation to go. And I definitely, the first time I read this, would not have picked up on that because I wouldn't have read any of other Stephen King books at that point. So I would definitely say, before you attempt to read Insomnia, you should definitely read a range of King's other books. I think it will help you appreciate this one more. So because Derry has been featured in other books, it has this history to it. And again, this is why I think you really, at the very least, need to read It before you read Insomnia. In It establishes this historical, this history with Derry, and you can feel that history come through in this book too. It even says on the cover of this book that Derry is not like other towns in that it has a mean streak running through it, and that underneath the surface of the city there's like awesome and terrifying forces at work, is what it says. Now in It, obviously those terrifying forces were Pennywise the Clown, and here the terrifying forces are a bit different, but I will talk about that later. So just to wrap up the world building here, this is definitely one of the things I liked about this book. I like the world of Derry. I like feeling like I know about it. I like feeling like I've been there before, even though it's not a real place. I just like all that. It feels like I'm part of something. So world building in this book is definitely A+. So now I'm going to jump in and talk about the characters. And I realize now at 5 minutes in that I didn't really talk about the setup of this book, but that's okay because I feel like the setup is really about the characters. So our main character, his name is Ralph Roberts, and Ralph Roberts, unfortunately, he had a wife that he was married to for a long time, and she recently passed away. And since she has passed, Ralph has been having trouble sleeping, hence insomnia. But unlike a normal person that suffers from insomnia, as the insomnia starts to grow and get worse, Ralph starts to see things, and the things that he sees, he's not sure if they're real, if he's like hallucinating, if it's a result of his insomnia, or is there something else going on? Now again, Ralph is a resident of Derry, and because he's lived in this town, he knows that the town has a reputation for strange things happening. However, some of the things that he starts to hallucinate are actual strangers, and those are these little bald men. Yes, that's right. Little bald men that look like doctors. So they're called the little bald doctors. And he sees these little bald doctors. He sees them around town, and they're always carrying scissors. And I love how Stephen King has to put the detail in there that they're not just any scissors, they're a rusty pair of scissors. And there's just something very sinister about the image of like this creepy little bald guy walking around with a rusty pair of scissors. I mean, that just sounds terrifying. So anyway, he sees these little bald men, and it seems like no one else can see them except for him. He's the only one that can see them. But these little bald men go up to other people in the town, and he starts to see that everyone around him kind of has a color around them, for lack of a better word. The long story short here is that Ralph starts to see people's auras. So you can call it a spirit, a soul, or whatever. In this book, they call it auras. So he can see people's auras, and kind of like whatever your color, your aura is, kind of represents how you are feeling at the moment. So someone that's feeling happy might have like a bright yellow aura, something like that. You know, someone who's in the hospital and is maybe dying might have a black aura. You know, it's very, very much like that. But these bald doctors with their rusty scissors can cut people's auras. And when that happens, oh man, things start to get super crazy. So Ralph is the one that is seeing all this stuff. And again, in the beginning, Ralph has no idea what's going on. Is this really happening? What's going on? Da 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 da. Now, at some point in the book, he does meet another person, a woman, who is also experiencing the same things that he is. So a woman who's having trouble sleeping, who's starting to notice these auras, and who can also see the little bald doctors. Ralph as a character himself, I like him, but at the same time, I also don't think there's anything like super remarkable about him. Like in the story, Ralph is just a regular guy. He's just a regular guy, and King writes him as a regular guy. Like there's nothing fantastical about him. So on one hand, that makes him a very well-written character, but on the other hand, it does make him kind of boring, at least to me, because he doesn't have any of those like big, strong personality traits that either might be more exciting or might be more relatable, etc., etc., etc. The only thing that I would say that would make Ralph relatable is because, like I mentioned, he is dealing with the death of his wife, the death of a loved one. And I think some of the things he goes through in this book, not just the insomnia itself, but what the insomnia represents, I think anyone that's dealt with loss or grief can probably relate to that on some level. Now, as for the little bald doctors themselves, we actually do get to know them in this story, and there are 3 of them. And I can't go into too much detail about them because that would be in spoiler territory, but let's just say that King basically sets up this supernatural world where these doctors are kind of agents of chaos, but also agents of balance. So like they're responsible for either like keeping life in balance or sometimes making things crazy. It's a lot. You're going to have to read it. I'll talk about it more in the plot. But I really enjoyed getting to know these characters because two of them are kind of like on the quote unquote good side. One of them is like a rogue and he's kind of on the bad side. And I think it's really fascinating, and they're really fascinating characters. And what they represent, it's a thinker. This book is definitely philosophical on a lot of levels, and it will make you think. So that leads me into the plot. So what is the plot of this book? We know we have a guy, he can't sleep, he's seeing doctors, what's going on? Well, the plot basically revolves around kind of what I mentioned, the doctors. We've got two doctors that are on the quote-unquote the side of good, and one doctor that has gone rogue and is kind of messing things up in the balance sheet of the universe, if you will. So the good doctors kind of approach Ralph to be like, hey, we know that this one guy has gone rogue and he may or may not, do some bad things that can have really long-lasting effects. Think of like a pebble in a pond. If he does this one thing, it's going to impact so many other things, so we need you to stop him. We can't interfere ourselves because we're higher beings, so we need you to do it for us. Yes. So the plot of this book is really like a struggle between free will and fate. Yes. I think this whole story can pretty much boil down to, is your life free will or is your life fate? It sounds simple, but the way that the book gets into this, it is really not. It is really not. There are so many questions asked in this book. So many questions about what is right, what is wrong, about what it means to be alive, about what it means to live, because those are not the same thing, about what it means to have free will and be able to make your own decisions, but also what it means to have like a destiny and fate. This book goes deep into all of that. It is very philosophical, and it will very much make you think. There's one thing I need to mention here, and I feel weird about mentioning it, but I can't not mention it. And trigger warning here, trigger warning for abortion. This book talks a lot about abortion because it very much plays into what is life versus non-life. And again, having free will to decide who lives and dies, or destiny of who needs to come into the world or who should not come into the world. Now, when I went to start my reread of this book, I did not remember that stuff at all. I did not remember it at all. And I don't know if I blocked it from my mind, or because I read it at such a young age, I don't know if my brain fully comprehended what all that discussion was about. So I may just not have understood at the time that I read it. Because it is in here, and it is a big point of the plot at times, I just want to forewarn anyone going in so that you're not shocked and surprised. So in conclusion about the plot, it is a bit all over the place. We've got Ralph and his grief and his sleeping problems. We've got the doctors and they're cutting auras, and then there's this big balance sheet of the universe, and then there's all this stuff going on in town. There is a lot going on in this book, and it's a little bit all over the place. And if I'm honest, I don't think this book needed to be that long. Stephen King does have a tendency to be wordy sometimes, and I think this is an example of that. I think this book definitely could have been edited down significantly to tell a more concise and cohesive story. So where does that leave me? Like I said, I really like the world building. The characters, I think, have some pros and cons, and then the plot, I'm a little it was okay. So overall, I would say I liked this book, but I don't love it. I liked it. I'm glad that I reread it. I am glad that I revisited it after all this time. But at this point, I have read so many Stephen King books, and I've read so many good ones. I do not think that this is one of the better ones. I don't. I would put it in the middle. It's a solid story. It's solid. It's not as horrible as some that I've read, but it's definitely not as good as Some of the ones I read last year, like Misery, Gerald's Game, those were excellent. This is not at that level. So if you are a huge Stephen King fan, you want to read all his books, you want to get in on his universe and be part of the fun, then I would definitely give Insomnia a try. If you are not a mega fan, if you really only want to read like Stephen King's best books ever, I would say you could probably skip this one. It's totally up to you though. So that brings me to the end of my Insomnia review. So now I want to know from you, have you read Insomnia? Did you like it? Did you like it more than me? What did you like? What didn't you like? Let me know all your comments in the comments section below. And if you made it to the end of this video, you get a rare appearance by Mr. Jack Jack. Jack Jack is getting old, so you'll notice he's losing some hair on his bottom, but that's okay. I still think that he's the most handsome boy ever. He's a handsome boy, Jack. You're a handsome boy. Okay. You're a little shy today. I know. I woke you up. I'm sorry. Thank you. As always, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're not already, please subscribe to my channel for more bookish stuff coming your way soon. All right, everyone. Happy reading.